Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the candidates. Congratulations on standing and putting yourselves forward to represent the community. We wish you all the best of luck. This will be relatively relaxed. We're not here to grill you or make your life difficult. What we're here to do is to understand essentially what sort of person you are, how you think you would deal with issues. There are a lot of sort of very specific questions that members have asked. We're not expected necessarily to know the answers to all of those things, but how you would approach them is very often the key to whether you're the right person to be in the job or not. The reality is that three of you will be in the government. Which three it is, we wait to see. But anyway, congratulations on putting yourselves forward. The way we plan to do this is we had circulated to you previously a series of questions. We're not going to read them out or ask them all specifically, but I'll take us through them section by section and ask each of you to make some comments. But to start off, if you wish, you could make a short statement about why you're the right person to represent the camp in the next government. If you don't wish to, that's fine. We can just carry on. But would anybody like to? I'll give you 2 minutes each, if you wish. Anybody want to?
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
I'm seeking re-election, and I think having had the benefit of the last 2 years as a member of the Assembly, and the experience and sort of knowledge that that's come with, I think that would be a great benefit to take that into a new term, starting from the beginning with what would be a number of fresh faces, and I think is a good opportunity to apply that knowledge and experience with, I think, the views of new members, to hopefully take us forward with a bit of a new direction, I think, and a bit of a clearer plan about how we tackle the future.
Not a rapid 25 seconds, so that's good. Anybody? Oh. Anybody?
Well, Andy's looking at me very, very wide-eyed over here, so I'll continue on this then. So I've been proposing to do this now for about the last 10 years, give or take, and obviously the timing and situations just weren't on my side. I was actually going to stand in the previous by-election, but because we were overseas having our little girl, couldn't commit to the timing, so it wasn't really a good idea to be thinking about trying to throw a campaign together from Cornwall. So evidently, I didn't stand. But this time round, I feel the time is right, and I'm ready to throw my all into it. I'm not going to say that I'm the most knowledgeable person in the room, but I am definitely willing to learn about every aspect and facet that I can honestly put my hand and hands to. With a little bit of background experience for myself, I'm obviously a camper born and raised, but I also come from a government background as well, having gone through the apprenticeship scheme and knowing all the ins and outs of the foibles of the education system. Having a couple of girls as well has also made the education system a completely different ballgame as well, so I bring that one to bear as any file I can. But ultimately, I am here as a community representative for and foremost. I am not here with a personal agenda. I am here to ensure that everyone's voice can be heard, and wherever applicable, we'll try and do something about it, but I'm also a realist. There's a lot of voices, a lot of people to be heard, and ultimately you can only please some of the people some of the time, so we'll see what people think about that. But anyway, on to you, Andy.
Cheers, pal. Weirdly, I never thought about running for an MLA position. It all started about 18 months ago. I was doing something completely different. I was drunk, actually, with a gang of us down at Goose Green. So we're just whining, as farmers do, about everything that was going on and how there's this massive disconnect between Stanley, all the adults as I call them, MLAs, local government, and agriculture. So, we got into a bit of a slang match, and basically I turned around and said, why didn't somebody do something about it? So they said, well, you do it now. So we started about 18 months ago holding some meetings. The first meeting was actually in the chamber, with a group of adults, as I call them, so MLAs, Director of Natural Resources, Workboat Services, FIMCO, blah, 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 and we got into a bit of a slang match, tried to open each other up, and then we went off to the west and had another one there for the West farmers. And the upshot of that is, over the course of 18 months, we've actually managed to get the FIP reinstated bigger and better than it was before. and things are moving along quite nicely, and then everybody just said, well, why the bloody hell didn't you run for MLA? You've started, you might as well finish. And at that point, it still wasn't kicking around in my head too much until Elaine said, well, why don't you? So here I am.
Here you are. Good. Thank you very much.
I'm standing because I've been in camp now for 11 years while on Pebble, and watching things progress or not progress in the agricultural industry, you get frustrated. So I thought maybe I should stand up and just see if I can help move things forward a bit for all of us, not just agriculture. There's tourism to think about. Other businesses in camp, there's 80% of campers are not agriculture related. And also the Falklands as a whole, the whole community. I'm not a politician at all. I've got no experience in politics. What I do have experience in is, as a youngster, I worked in the hospital as a nurse, as a medic. I've got 10 years experience in the police force, both here and in the UK. I'm used to dealing with people, community issues, moving things forward, problem solving. And I only thought about it about a year ago to actually stand. And once I made that noise, I just kept moving with it, and I've had a lot of encouragement on the way to just get up and do it. So we'll see what happens.
Good. Thank you very much. Way short of 2 minutes. So that's good. So I'll take you into the first sort of little group of questions, and they were about long-term vision. And I think this is quite an important question for candidates, for us to be able to judge sort of how you think about the Falklands going forward. So the questions were outlining your long-term vision for the Falklands economy on the assumption that there's oil, and also on the assumption that there's not. What sort of country do you envisage running here? Because if oil happens, it happens in a week or two, and all hell will break loose.
Well, as no one seems to be keen to kick off, I'll start over on this end here. Ultimately, hydrocarbons is that big monster in the room. It is on its way, or as far as we know, it's on its way. And yes, it is going to have a very large impact on life here in the islands. We only need to look back, going to when the initial exploration of oil came into the islands, and we've seen the infrastructure that was coming in. We've seen the amount of people that was going to be potentially employed. We also seen a very, very large hike in prices. We also seen a lot of change. Now, these are not necessarily good things, but they're not necessarily bad things either. We have to be realistic in the fact that at this moment in time, we are looking at a lot of money being spent on capital projects. The reserves are there, but ultimately they are not going to last if we are going to end up spending out on vast quantities. So we have to ultimately keep ourselves afloat one way, in shape or form. Now, I'm not necessarily going to say that hydrocarbons is going to be the be-all and end-all, but it is going to definitely help along the way. We're going to have to ensure that we get a handle on it from day one.
Okay. Andy?
Cheers, mate.
You're right.
It's going to be really difficult. It's not just going to be drilling for oil and here's loads of money. It's everything before that comes before that, the planning, the infrastructure, everything is going to be pretty traumatic down there. The other thing is the Dutch back in the 60s had something similar called, I think they call it the Dutch effect, something like that, Dutch Elm effect, back in the 60s when the Dutch basically found natural gas in the North Sea. One of the biggest problems they had, slightly different to us, was that a lot of people in lesser businesses on not a lot of money flocked to the coast to get jobs in the gas industry because there's a lot of money there. And I think probably that's going to be one of the problems that hasn't really been talked about here. If there are, which there's bound to be lots of jobs in the oil industry here, people are just going to flock to Stanley and do that sort of thing. I mean, it's already pretty dire in camp as it is. And with other people leaving and trying to get into diversification and trying to make ends meet, agriculture is going to be pretty much on its arse. along with everything else that comes with the oil industry. I mean, it all looks good on paper, but to get ready for it is going to be pretty massive.
I think so in an oil situation, I think it sort of presents great opportunities in the oil industry itself and the revenue that can generate for FIG and the wider community, and the benefits that could have for the population. I would agree with all the points made about the challenges that an oil sector will come with. It also then opens up lots of opportunities for other sectors that have currently been quite challenging because of cost, whether it's things like second commercial flights or second ferries or other things which at the moment are quite expensive would be a good enabler for growth in existing sectors but are currently not overly achievable or realistic because of the cost of putting them in place at the moment and whether or not there's an actual business case for them if they were to be put in place. So or revenue generated from oil would very much assist with those. In a no-oil situation, I think there's very much a need, and I think this should happen anyway, but especially if hydrocarbons doesn't progress, a need to have a plan for the future and what we're going to do. I think we've seen over the last couple of years that the fragility of the fishing sector, while we have all benefited from it, it is fragile and subject to environmental challenges. Agriculture is struggling and tourism has a limit on how much it can grow at the moment without given infrastructure, so we will need to look to try and develop those sectors, but then also look for other areas that we can expand into to fill that gap.
Yes, so obviously if it does happen, then it could be a very positive thing for the islands. It's imperative that we manage it properly as it progresses, and in the meantime, keep things going. Housing is a huge issue. Workforce, it would be very attractive to go to the oil industry to get a decent wage, and what's going to happen to the rest of the businesses that are running in Stanley and Cal. If oil doesn't happen, then I think we need to look at other ventures of getting income. I mean, tourism obviously is one thing, but with the way the flights are, with the road to wings and stuff, is there any sort of scope to deal with that? The cruise ship industry, I think maybe it was a mistake hiking up the prices for landing fees, it's put a few people off, so that may have done a bit of damage, so maybe that needs looking at. And industries like maybe kelp harvesting, things that aren't going to damage the environment.
Any other members have any supplementary questions they want to put to the members on long-term vision? So the second set of questions, thank you very much for that. The second set of questions were about government structure and management, and I think we have to appreciate that, having not been in the government, perhaps not that familiar with it, but the questions were about the size of the public service and whether it's too big, your understanding of the structure of government and the role of MLA's legislative function, and is it sufficiently clear and properly executed? Do you support the recording of MLA votes in Exco as a way of checking, as the way of the electorate checking what their members are doing? The government employs the overwhelming majority of the available workforce, and this will expand further. How is this to be addressed? Several key sectors within the government suffer with short-term contracts and rotation. Do you have any views about that? There was a question that asserted that civil servants are making all the critical decisions and MLAs are only endorsing them. Do you agree with that or don't you? And what would you do about it? And what would you do to reduce waste and bureaucracy in government? So there's a whole series of things there. Deal with any of them. You can't deal with all of them, but deal with any of them if you wish. Do you want to start, Andy?
No, not particularly.
Did you force my
Oh, bloody hell. What was the first one? Let's try again. Let's start from the top. What was the first one? I can't remember. There's a lot
there.
there.
The first one was about the size of the public service.
Yeah, it's pretty big, isn't it? It is, I mean, it is big. It got bigger, especially when Tussock House came online, because we just don't have enough of those specialists kicking around on the island. So, it's not just Tussock House. There are a lot of people in government, and, I think everybody's aware that things need to be slightly streamlined. I mean, the amount of money that's going out paying civil servants is massive. I can't remember now, there's this 30 odd vacancies still. I can't remember.
100 to 150.
Oh, there you go. So I'm bang on target there. So, you know, it's massive. So yeah, things do need streamlining, things do need looking at, and we do need to make a few savings. However, that being said, in the future, if hydrocarbons does come and things do grow, then, you know, maybe we'll have to get a little bit bigger, and it's going to cost more money, but only the future.
But there'll be a way to fund it.
Well, if you know, we have to be careful. We can't just say, yeah, we need people and get them in. It's all down to funding, which there doesn't seem to be a lot of at the moment.
Jack, you got any views on any of this section?
Yes. I think I'll pick on the one that hasn't been touched on. The question about whether or not officers are making key decisions. I think from my experience in the last 2 years, I would say no. And the decisions very much sit with members. I think, and having not been there at the beginning of an assembly, and I think this is something I think needs to happen the next time around for the new group, that from the beginning there needs to be more work put into creating a clearer and more concise plan, and then commitment throughout the life of the Assembly to stick as much as possible to that plan, of course leaving space for things that come up that you can't plan for. Because I think the downfall of the last Assembly, we had an honest plan with 158 priorities in it. You can't achieve anything meaningfully when you've got 158 priorities. I think that there needs to be a greater focus on trying to deliver what we're currently working on at the moment, slimming down the to-do list, and probably cutting back on a number of the things that members have wanted to do but were not really achievable, and then at the same time having an eye on sort of the long term and what the impacts of the work we're doing at the moment will have, and how we're going to potentially address issues that come up in the future that we're not looking at the moment. So I think that we'd like to think that if that's put in place, that the direction very much comes from members in the beginning. They will then sort of annually apply that to the budget process, and throughout the life of the Assembly, the civil service will work towards delivering that. I can see how there might be a view that officers are sometimes making decisions and MLAs are just rubber stamping, and I think there's work needed through the way that things are communicated, the way that the members discuss things with the public, the way things are consulted on, and how consultations are held, to make sure that, I suppose, it's clearer throughout the process what the views of members are, that people are aware that those discussions have been held, that there are disagreements sometimes, but ultimately that decision making perhaps sits with members rather than officers at that more strategic level, not so much on an operational level.
Is there a bit on back contracts?
There was a bit about short-term contracts. There was several key sectors within the government suffer with a number of short-term contracts and locums rotating through the islands. Do you view that as a problem, and what would you be urging the public service to do about it?
I'd like to see, like, for example, the hospital, more than 50% are on either overseas contract or agency staff. I'd like to see that reduced, more people on local contract, local terms. I'm not entirely sure how much money gets spent on recruiting people all the time. I mean, I think it's got better now with the education system, but when George was at school, he had 16 science teachers in 5 years. That's a lot of money spent on recruiting people and, you know, relocating people, and gratuities paid out and things like that. I'd like that to improve. I'd like us to encourage good people to stay. They get put off, you know, they get to that point where they reach the end of their contract and they're offered local terms. It's not enough, so they leave. And plus housing is an issue as well. I think we should meet them halfway.
So in regards to the contract side of things, I tend to agree with Dot on most of everything that she's saying there. We do have quite a few posts and positions along the way that are on a temporary level that could ultimately have a more permanent basis. But there are also other positions along the way that perhaps could be subbed out, or possibly through a scheme of mentorships, or even to do successor platforms to to allow for our young people who are going away and studying overseas, who are coming back. Yes, they're coming back with their qualifications, but not necessarily with the relevant experience that they might actually need to go into these positions. Now, with that, instead of them having to stay overseas for another extended 5 or however many years, perhaps we could also think about the prospect of bringing them in and then writing into the contracts of the people that we have on place at the moment, that they will then mentor these young people to bring them forward. We'll start them off at an acceptably good wage, shall we say, that is to their relevant experience, and then over the course of that contract, they will then be shadowing that officer in lieu at the end to finally set up against testing and examining, if you will, and then if they meet the criteria, then we can potentially put a local in that position rather than having it a continuous overflowing run of a continuous amount of contractors coming through the door.
Can I just add something? Obviously in agriculture industry we have a lot of dealings with the ag department. We've seen a lot of people coming through on short contracts, like a couple of years. The first year is spent learning about the islands and how things do and don't grow here. And by the time they've got some experience, they're leaving. And somebody new comes to fill their shoes. I'd love to see some more continuity for all our sakes, longer term. Because everything's so short-term vision. I don't think like that. I think 10 years, 20 years ahead, especially for farming. So I'd like to see more, maybe longer contracts or, yeah, more continuity.
Any supplementary questions from members?
We obviously have a problem with recruitment because we've got 120 posts in government and fund. How would you think about solving some of those issues?
I probably should have said that at the beginning, but I think a fairly large portion of those 120, 150 vacancies do end up getting filled by whether it's locums or short-term contract workers or agency staff or people on secondment, and that's sort of an issue in itself, which only then adds to the cost. But I think those two issues very much linked. We have a large number of vacancies that we're not filling with permanent staff. We're then trying to fix that problem with short-term staff, which come at a cost and then have impacts, as has already been said, on sort of the stability in FIG and then the impact that has on the service and the end user. So I don't think there's one solution, but there is very much a problem.
Sadly, in one of the positions, Chief of Police, the right guy was down there a few years ago for the job, but it just, FIG at the time just didn't seem to bend. Gavin Clifton was the man, and he would have been ideal. Sort of a local, used to community policing, which is exactly what he needed. But since then, it's been a bit sporty in that position. And now there is no immediate likelihood of filling that position. The trouble is that's one of the few positions that is very difficult to fill because you're asking for somebody with experience, with a almost village Bobby type approach, with the qualifications, but the pay is just nowhere near what it is in the UK. So to get somebody down that's going to fit is going to be extremely difficult.
So would you think that what you should be doing is setting out for the public service the approach that you would want them to take to recruitment and say, do it this way, don't keep doing it that way?
I think it needs looking at. I haven't got the answer right now, but it certainly needs looking at for maybe more than just that particular post.
One of the other questions in here was about the structure of government. Would you each expect to carry on just operating the way that has been done in the last several decades, or would you think about changing it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think based off 2 years' experience, I'd say absolutely it needs to happen. This Assembly has not been an efficient or particularly effective machine over the last couple of years, and I think there's a need to review that. I think there's also, I think with the candidates out in front of you today, with the exception of me, the positive step seeing 3 camp-based candidates and putting themselves forward for election. At least 2 of them will be elected, maybe 3, although I hope not. And that will then require a change in the way that the Assembly functions at the moment, because we've had a number of years of either all Stanley-based camp members or camp members who haven't had the same commitments as the three individuals sat here today. So there will be a need for change to help sort of facilitate that. And I would like to hope that change will then, that opportunity for change will be linked to wider changes in the way that the Assembly functions and how it runs itself and interacts with not only with the internal FIG but then also external bodies.
Anybody else of that view?
I would say that the existing structure is obviously the bones and framework that has been in place for a great many years. It's not essentially the most stable of structures, but as anyone who's ever worked on scaffolding will tell you, it shakes, but it won't fall over. However, just because it shakes and doesn't fall over doesn't mean that that's right. There is bits and pieces along the way that do need to be streamlined. There is restructuring that does need to happen in certain parts and places, but we also have to be very, very realistic that we are going to be running very close to the wire financially, and any kind of reform that is brought in is going to cost money to implement. Do we really, really want to be spending that money implementing that kind of change when that money could actually be used to actually betterment on all of other projects and bits and pieces?
I was thinking more in the way that MLAs organise themselves.
Oh, I see.
You don't have to do what everybody else has done before. There's nothing written almost about how MLAs behave and how they.
No, and again, that side of it, forgive me. Well, for us that are coming from the campsite, as Jack has said, there is going to have to be a little bit of buoyancy while we find our feet, if we eventually find ourselves in that position. But with technology moving along the way it is, with virtual technology being as it is, conferencing and what have you, is doable from an office at home, so on and so forth. So perhaps there's not necessarily necessary for us to be in-house all the time. As long as we're doing our jobs, or potentially doing our jobs, then that's the best we can honestly hope for.
Thank you. We probably ought to move on. Anything else from the audience around that set of topics?
Just one thing really for Jack. If you get in, do you have in your mind the kind of bones of an idea as to how the structure of the workings of the upper part of government could be changed for the Assembly to consider? Don't necessarily say what it is, but I'm just interested in whether some thoughts are beginning to go into how to change it, because some of the big things people are saying is transparency. A lot of that I think is more process than anything else, and how you communicate that transparency was a comment about, how people vote in EXCO. There's more to it than that. The committee structure, the way the mechanics of it.
Yes, I wouldn't say I have a sort of a detailed plan. I think there are a couple of what I'd like to think are relatively simple things that could be altered. Things like the way the chair of the Assembly operates. It's not a legally defined position, but from the last 2 years, I think it's quite an important role if used properly to help make sure that the daily workings of the Assembly are as effective as they can be, and that you don't end up just talking yourself around in circles day after day. So things like tweaking the role of the chair, I think the new Assembly is a good time to look at the portfolio system, the way that's set up, what members sit on committees, how those committees function, those kind of things. So I think hopefully with a number of fresh pairs of eyes looking at that system, there'll be questions as to why has it been done this way, can we do it differently. I think then a general openness to change, I think would be a positive step. We've had probably the last two assemblies at least, where things have been largely the same for those 8 years. There are a few things that just don't work. I think having a group of people around the table who are willing to accept that certain things don't work as well as they probably could, try something differently. If that doesn't work, then that's fine. You can either go back to how it was before, or you can try something different again. Mm-hmm. And I think having that kind of approach to whatever it might be is needed to try to keep that process of evolution of FIG, of the assembly, of the way the Falklands operates going, because I don't think we're looking for a revolution and a complete overhaul of the entire system, but I think we need to carry on that journey of evolution, because we have, well, as a country and an organisation and a setup, it's not very old. It's changed quite a lot in a relatively short space of time, and I think we just need to make sure that we continue doing that for the better.
In addition to that, I certainly think there needs to be more face time, physical face time, talking to actual people, which would be nice.
Well, the basic place has been
Yeah,
lack of that.
go around departments or just going out to camp, wherever, just putting yourself out there and not just constantly reading, because you learn more, you learn probably just as much from talking to somebody face to face as you will reading something.
Most definitely.
Talking to constituents.
Well, that's
Exactly.
complaints through the whole thing.
And considering there seems to
It's a
be,
novel idea
No,
for
but it's
politicians.
you know, it's just, you know, everybody likes a gas, don't they?
Can I take us
I
on
guess
to
the work just expands to fill the time. You know, it's a problem. You know,
Exactly.
My question is whether you need 8 MLAs if they're going to be more strategic and policy driven, for example. Obviously not something for now. It's a bit late for that. You know.
Can I take us on to the next section? Conscious we've used half of our time in this section already. But there's a whole section of questions here about the economy and economic levers and taxation, and as you'd expect from the Chamber of Commerce, there are a lot of them. But the questions around this area were about whether the local content policy for the oil industry is adequate or not. What's your view about external funding? There's very little commercial funding available in the Falklands. What's your view about external funding coming in, and would you support it? What's your view for the development of the tourism industry? What's your vision for commercial land availability to enable growth in all businesses? It's quite a big issue that we raised. What do you understand by the user pays principle in relation to the provision of public services? And do you support that as a principle, or is it not right? Do candidates support increased and new taxes with an adverse effect on businesses? There was a question about the long-term future of standing growers, and one of our questioners was interested on Fembler's views about that. Do the candidates support a one-stop agency to drive inward investment? Do you support the continuation of FIDC? If so, what measurable objectives should it have? How will candidates address electricity prices? There's a question that asks, do you agree that government spending is out of control? And finally, how do you propose to move from 12-month budgets to ensuring longer-term? There's a hell of a lot in there, and there's a lot of stuff. But if you'd like to pick up on any bits of that, Doc, you're happy to go.
Tax, it's been mentioned about capital gains and inheritance tax being brought in. I'm not a fan of that. Let's make that clear.
No, I think that in regards to inheritance tax in particular, we will see the death of most of the small farms in the Falkland Islands should that come into effect. It's no secret that most of the people who are currently living and working on these farms, they are getting older as each day goes past. And for the younger ones that are actually standing in the wings, if we get hit with inheritance tax, it's game over. It will wipe us out. We will not be able to afford, let alone to stand up and carry on. So definitely not. In regards to the tourism side of things, I do believe that tourism could be improved upon in several ways. We have done much the same thing that we've been continuing to do for the last 20, 25 years. Yes, we have penguins. Yes, we have overland tours. And yes, there are other ventures along the way that have come into place. But ultimately, we are starting to get to a point of, are we becoming a one-trick pony? There are other places in the world you can go and see penguins, and they're a lot closer to home and a lot cheaper to get to. We have to be very careful that we do not end up actually pricing ourselves out of the market on that one.
Who do you think should be responsible for driving that change?
I personally think on that one that there should be emphasis put there for the tourist board, and obviously the board of directors. They are there to ensure the smooth sailing and running. But ultimately there should also be a large amount of involvement from tourist-based industries and business owners as well. Any new ideas or any new thought processes ultimately should be brought to the table. There must be ways and means of actually bringing that forward. But ultimately it all will come down to infrastructure and funding. Whether or not these businesses that are proposing this have the strength to actually bring that forward, or whether or not that is going to then potentially bring FIDC into the equation on this one, to then see about potential financial push forwards to allow people to actually bring everything home and try and get something else up off the ground. It's all things that do need to be taken into consideration, and it should be looked into. We need to keep pressing forward.
Anything on this section?
Stanley Growers. What do we do with it? FIG bought it. Do we keep it? Do we sell it? Do we split it up? Or do we FIG own a stake in it? It's a toughie. But since FIG took over it, they seem to be growing less and less and less. When Jan and Tim ran it, obviously it was their own business and there was always something on the shelves. But now there just seems to be pretty much nothing until the boat comes in. So I think we need to get that looked at fairly quickly. I appreciate there is a director that has been allocated to the market garden, but there just seems to be no progress at all from what I can see. So I would say that's quite important because we all like a bit of fresh fruit and veg. Fruit might be a problem, but the veg thing.
The Chamber of Commerce is intuitively opposed to the government getting itself involved in business. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, if we were going to be honest, FIG probably didn't want to do it, but you know they're there now, so we need to look at ways to make it move forward.
In favour of putting up taxes, Jack?
No. I suppose the downside of the statutory process under the last assembly that just gone was that there was not any agreement or majority view on the rates and the types of new taxes side of the review. I think there was general agreement on the part of the review that focused on fixing known errors and problems with the legislation that's involved in these updating. Sort of the process part of it, there was not agreement on whether rates should change or new taxes should be introduced. There will be a need as part of that review for the new assembly to make an early, well, maybe not an early decision, but give an early direction as to what they want to do with that review in terms of rates and new taxes, and whether they want any, or whether they want to see sort of some more modelling on it before they make any decision. And I think that's something that will need to happen early on. It's not being touched on. Access to finance is something that FIG, I stop saying we. FIG have worked with the Chamber on over quite a period. There was a couple of months ago the proposal approved for sort of further work on accessing potential lines of credit supported by FIG and then lent out through FIDC, and how that might work, and that would, if goes ahead, will hopefully provide a lot of opportunity for certain businesses of a certain size to be able to access finance that's currently not available to them. It still isn't the final solution, because there'll be a lot of smaller businesses, and particularly farms who borrow for longer periods who won't be able to access that option at the moment. But I think hopefully is a step in the right direction, and there will be an improvement in the situation where at the moment the only place you can go to borrow money is FIDC, and as we've seen over the last 12 months, that isn't always as smooth as it sort of should be, and because it's wholly backed by FIG, it comes with its own problems. So I think there have been some positive steps in some of those areas, but very much like to continue those.
Doctor, have you got a view about commercial land availability?
Yeah, I was funny enough to ask the question earlier. for housing as well, especially. Why can't
Housing
we,
and for business and
yeah,
whatever.
why can't we release more land that people still want?
So you're not,
Right sector.
you're not one of these people who thinks that the government should keep every little piece of land
No.
and not let anybody on it.
Definitely not.
No, I'm
We
not.
need to open up, we need to develop.
What else was in here that might be of interest? I mean, so far, I mean, I've read, I think, everybody's manifesto, and I haven't seen anybody suggest that they want to put taxes up. So my take from that is there'll be no mandate to put taxes up because nobody's put it in the manifesto.
I take it as a good sign, Mike.
Yeah. I mean, there's a question about government spending. Does anybody want to address that? I believe the recurrent expenditure has just about doubled in the last 8 years. Do you think that's sustainable?
They're not sustainable at all.
No.
It's impossible. It's to use. I'm a simple bloke with simple means, so I'm going to go into simple mode. Basically, it seems to me that money's been splattered around all over the place for quite a while, with no clear direction, really. I've had a nose, or quite a good read of the Island Plan, and I think it's just a mess. It just seems to be a wish list of 8 people that have a portfolio to spend money in all over the place directions, whereas there just doesn't seem to be a common direction for people to follow. So in my head, I've got a simple plan. I don't think it is that simple in real life, but it's basically shaped the triangle, and the top of the triangle is basically where we would like the population of the country to be in 10, 15, 20 years' time, with oil and without oil. And then below that, in order to get us there, we are obviously going to need immigration, because there's always going to be people with skill sets we need that we don't have here. But alongside immigration has to be housing, because everybody needs somewhere to live. And as soon as you get into housing, then you're on to your infrastructure, schools, health, education. In my head, that seems to me like a pretty simple direction that everybody should sort of be pulling into to take the population in the country forward.
Anything from anybody down the floor? Any other questions?
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah. Please.
I think there was a user pays question. I thought that was quite interesting. Perhaps they could address that.
Yes. So the question was, what do you understand by the user pays principle in relation to the provision of public services, and how would you change the current approach?
I'd very much like to hope, although we'll have to wait and see, whether the new Assembly, as part of the first budget, will be presented with a piece of work on the user-based policy, and we'll be able to make a decision on that early on. And that piece of work has sort of been happening in the background since the end of the last budget process this year. And it's very much hoped that will be ready for the first budget of the new Assembly. And there will be a need for decisions on what that policy is, on what areas seek to recover costs and to what level. And then once that is agreed, there is a need to then try and stick to that as much as possible, because a lot of the problems we've seen in the last couple of years, where there's been deviation from what had been an agreed policy, and then not always a reason behind why that's been done. So
everybody's aware, I mean, there are a lot of areas that could be covered by this, aren't there? There's FIGAS, the ferry, health services, education. I mean, never mind just sort of cutting grass around Stanley, that's sort of the least of everybody's worries. But all these other issues, electricity prices, of course. So there's quite a lot of potential areas where this concept could be used. I'm opposed to governing by slogan. I'm not sure how many people actually understand what it means.
There are very few areas where the user does pay the full cost of running the service. I suppose
including veterinary services, you know, I mean, dear to your hearts. Yeah.
Yes.
Going to the Stanley Growers one, how many of you think that government should step in and fund that, just because the Falkland Islands needs pressure and veg, and nobody is willing to take that as a commercial business because it doesn't work? should government...
Has it been put on the market? Do you know what I mean? It didn't happen. Government bought it off tins. I understood it. So
It's
never,
there.
It never went out anywhere.
I mean, as I understand it, it's a very difficult business to make money in. Being the ex-dairyman's daughter, I know how difficult it is to make money in that sort of business. How far should government go to support those industries? That's really the wider question.
Well, although, like government getting into private business, I mean, it is realistically part of the food security of the islands to try and grow something fresh. Either that or convince people to start growing fresh in the backyards. But it would be nice if a business would take it on, or it could be split up and several businesses could take on several parts of it. I don't know what the answer is.
Well, it has been run as a commercial business for the best part of 35 years.
Yes, it has, yeah.
So I dare say it can
But
make money.
when it's yours, you treat it like it is yours. But when somebody else is running it and you're an employee, you don't treat it like it's yours. No.
As all farmers know.
I think that in the respect of standard growers, a lot of people would have the potential or possibly have the gumption to actually take it on. But it's that initial foreboding, it's the cost, it's the implications, and ultimately it's the turmoil with the land as well. All of the paddock spaces that were used down along the bottom ends have now been taken away and are used maybe going towards the causeway. That means that the spud field that they opened up down at the bottom of Megabit, that was the agreed on plots exchange, I believe, is going to be completely undeveloped. So whoever takes that on is going to have to run that initial risk of setting up that infrastructure from day one. It's a hell of a risk to try and get that all set up, as we all know. But it's whether or not somebody actually would have the gumption, as it were, to take it on. But I'm not hearing of anyone at the moment who's actually said, yeah, I'll do it.
No, I think it's Hamish said, I don't think it's been offered for
It
sale.
hasn't been put out there, has it? So
But even then, 3 beers deep in the pub, oh, I could run that. You don't even hear that. So there's no will or drive. But if it was put out there, you'd soon find out.
But if it was put out there and nobody had interest in it, do you think government should keep supporting it? That's really sort of my
What was
question.
the cost of the taxpayer?
The cost of the taxpayer to keep providing that. Just
It's interesting.
yes, don't know.
At Farmers
Haven't
Week,
thought
Steve
about
Dent was asking farmers to consider growing more veg and stuff to supply the local population, but not just that, the military. And we're thinking, wow, it's a big ask. We grow potatoes, we've lost 2 years in a straight, with the whole crop's gone to one frost. So there's a lot of risk in growing stuff without the infrastructure. And where do you get the support and finance to diversify into that from government? That's
If you look at Jeremy and Stacey Ponce, who run the, I can't remember what it's called, South Atlantic Harvest, is it, or something like that? Jeremy is a very, very clever man, and he's built a little empire there, and he's coming into town with veg boxes and all sorts of stuff. So it is possible, but it's like it was, still is a big going concern. It would be quite daunting, I think, for somebody to take the whole thing on. Maybe, I don't know. I really don't know. So going back to your question, I don't know that either. I don't know whether government should continue to fund it or not. I mean, they've got to have something.
Tell that like you says what the cost in the first year has been, for example, which won't be what it should have cost.
Yeah.
Put into it. It's very difficult to take any
Could I just make the point that government are subsidising our meat production?
yes.
Why not subsidise vegetable production? It's the same thing we've got to eat. It doesn't matter if it's vegetables or meat. Government have already taken that initiative to keep people out in camp. So
Thank you. Can we move on to infrastructure? I'm not doing a very good job here, it's already 10 to 6. Move on to infrastructure. There are obviously sort of some big projects about the sort of questions that have been asked were or there's a statement that says the government cannot afford its planned infrastructure projects. What will your approach be if you're in government? There's a question about long-term professional contracts and whether that's value for money. There's a question about commercial wind power generation in the Falklands. How would you address lack of storage capacity? And then there's a question about housing. So housing availability and affordability is a critical issue. Do you support long-term leases of land for housing development? And how would you address the problem of the government being unable to accommodate all of its incoming contract staff, thus distorting the housing market? And I don't know if you're all aware that the government rents a lot of houses in the private sector because it doesn't have enough of its own. Anyway, those are the questions around infrastructure. They have a view about.
Why does land have to be leased from government? Why not it be sold?
So on the commercial wind one, could I just ask is the question around whether there's any ideas on a commercial body getting involved in power production?
I think that's what the question essentially asks.
Okay.
Is there any reason why government should be so anti-people? Well, I guess this is a standing question rather than a camp question, because in camp everybody produces their own power, but in Stanley there seems to be a lack of willingness to allow people to produce their own power. Is that a good thing?
Is that because of complications of feeding it back into the grid if you have access?
That's my understanding. I think that's a fantastic question for sometime next week when you have the resident specialist as part of the panel. I think from the discussions that were sort of held at the time the decision was made around the next phase of the Sound Bay wind farm, and there were conversations about whether we might look to potential private investment in it. I think the areas where those sort of questions were coming from possibly not where we want to see involvement coming from. But would you want to? Would you have a sort of public-private partnership model, that maybe a sort of a Stanley Services kind of deal? The issues that then came up with that were largely around the electricity price. If you're having a private body involved in it, how would that impact the price of electricity because of the amount of investment being needed to build these things, and whether it's the power station or turbines or anything else, an amount of return would need to be generated, and would that then only result in higher electricity prices, which would have an impact on everyone. So if government has total control of it, does that reduce the risk of that happening? Because it can either decide to recover the full cost of the infrastructure, or it can make a decision to just absorb the costs and reduce the price to consumers. So I think there's probably a need to be open to have conversations in the future about public-private partnerships around certain services. I think there are some areas where you probably wouldn't want that at all. But I think it doesn't hurt to be open to at least having conversations. I don't think that necessarily means committing to sort of mass privatisation or anything like that.
The candidates have views about the current infrastructure programme and how it's being executed. What would you do?
I'd get the power station running first. Get the power station up.
We've got to.
Why priority?
Yeah.
No power, no Stanley. That's the simple fact of the matter. I mean, going back to the port and the power station, I mean, if you go back 4, 5, 6 councils, well, if we're going to be absolutely honest with ourselves, back then, MLA's councillors, they knew 5 Pass was going to need replacing. They knew, and then they didn't make the decision, and it just went on and on and on and on for whatever reason. But now we've ended up at the end of the tunnel, basically, where there is no choice. We can't go on anymore. So, hence the loan, and we're just going to have to get on with it. It's not ideal. It's not what everybody wants, but it's going to be a port at some point, and we will have a power station at some point, and the decision had to be made. It's
How would you think you might plan infrastructure projects going forward? I mean, if you take as a given that the port is underway, the power station is underway, and the renewables and the waste management project is underway, so that's quite a big big bubble. What would you do after that?
Is there anything left? I mean, you know, I don't know. I haven't seen figures. I'm sure there's not a lot left. But if there was anything that could be done after that, if I had a choice, I'd like to see housing or something.
Camp infrastructure.
Camp infrastructure, you know, it's always a big question, isn't it? After we've had a miserable time, haven't we, touring around the West, the four of us. But really, it's quite simple. You know, it's the roads, it's the arteries of the West, and they have been, I'm not going to say neglected. There is work done on the roads, but like if we could just get a mobile crosser over there and just cap the roads that need capping, that would almost solve the problem. I'm not saying you can do it in 1 year. It would probably take 2 or 3 years, maybe a little bit longer, but that would solve the majority of the problems on the West. It's, you know.
The basic measure for camp residents, especially on the West, is if you can look after the roads, we can actually function when our business will look after ourselves and work services. There's more flexibility and more processes. We can look after ourselves, but without these things in place,
So we're a couple of minutes to 6. I'm supposed to be nearly finished in this section. But we can be flexible here as long as you've got time. People have got time.
Just swinging very quickly back to
Yeah.
the main infrastructure question, one, it's very simple. There is a lot of projects which are going to cost a vast amount of money, and there's only a certain amount of money that we can actually use. To even consider that there's going to be money left over at the end of that for any ongoing projects is somewhat ludicrous at this stage. So what's the goal at the end of this? Have a couple of quid at the end of it and we'll see what happens.
Okay. There were a series of questions about education and childcare. One was about the management of apprenticeships, one about children's early education, one about the childcare subsidy, and one about a cap on parental childcare rates. Does anybody have any views in this area that they'd like to share? You're a former apprentice.
I was going to say, you come to me first, please.
Yeah.
For the apprenticeship side of things, I think that it's absolutely vital that our young people are given every opportunity they can to flourish. We need to utilise that training centre, we need to utilise every resource we can to get our young people off the ground and flying from day one. In my former years, I actually worked up at the training centre as an instructor working on a programme that was the Young Apprenticeship Scheme. This took on young people from the academic side who were less than academic, shall we say. They were not particularly going forward with their GCSEs, so the school actually picked them out and said, can you do anything with these kids? They sent them on to us and we started them down the road of the trades. Myself, Marcus Morrison, Kev Ross, we had, I think, something in the regions of between 14 and 16 kids. I can't remember, it was a long time ago. And we taught them the basics in mechanical engineering, woodwork principles, carpentry and plumbing. All of those kids thrived in that situation. However, when we tried to expand upon this, we wanted to expand the building, we wanted to expand our numbers. Days on, the money was not available. We couldn't go any further with it. And I, for one, was gutted that we could not continue. However, it is vital that we see our young people move forward. So I'm a very strong advocate for that one.
Any more views about the childcare issues?
Well, having had the benefit of being on EXCO when we made the decision, one of the last EXCOs of the last assembly made the decision after concerns were raised by childcare providers about the level of the parental cap, given it hadn't changed for 8 years. It was starting to have a serious impact on their ability to cover costs and then deliver a quality service. So the request was made for an increase to that. So the cap wasn't removed completely because members were concerned about the impact that would then have on parents and people using those services. And to completely remove the cap or to increase it too much, all in one go would have a pretty big knock-on effect. So just trying to find the right balance at the time. The cap was increased to, I believe, £3 an hour per child, to help sort of relieve some of the pressure on the providers, but also not to have too much of a knock-on effect on sort of the service users. At the time of that decision, there was also agreement on the need for a further review to make sure that system is working properly and that the fees are set at the right level. And I think we very much support that going forward in the new assembly and seeing that piece of work completed.
Okay. I'm over the time when we should have finished, but we'll give ourselves another few minutes. Are there any questions from members present that they would like to put to the candidates?
Big areas within the childcare sector these days, which I think is growing. I think we do a fantastic job on with the SEND, so the shielding is really, really great. But that area is going to grow. Do you sense that there's a requirement there that's needed to be filled, or do you think it's well filled already?
I'm quite strong an advocate of the numbers will show, and ultimately if we end up with a further requirement as time goes along, then provision will have to be made. But until you actually see that the requirement is there, then the provision is met. It's a difficult one. It's knowing the figures and knowing the numbers right from the get-go.
Any other questions anybody wants to raise?
Just going back to Jack's point in terms of the cap, why is it that EXCO have to meet once a decade in order to be able to determine these price increases? If they would have, per se, been tracked to RPI each year, then the businesses would be covered. The childcare providers, which are absolutely necessary, would have their costs covered yearly, and EXCO wouldn't have to waste their time every 8 years to determine a 25-50 pence increase per hour.
I agree, and that was the very same comments were made during EXCO. There have been, it's not the first one, there have been a couple of things that have come up, certainly over the last 2 years that I've been involved, where a rate has been missed or it's just not been thought about when it was implemented, and a fixed rate was put in legislation and hasn't been changed as part of the annual budget process, and we'd like to very much hope that all of the ones that have been identified will now be part of that process, or an adjustment's been made to make sure it's a figure linked to a certain thing and can be uplifted in line with other things when that happens, so that we don't get this massive delay between things being looked at. And there will, I'm sure, will be many other things across FIG and lots of different fees and charges and rates and caps that haven't been picked up yet, but I would like to hope that certainly as we come across them that they are addressed, and then the system is tweaked for the future to make sure that doesn't happen again. But I think there probably is whether there can be a relatively quick look across the board to try and make sure we have mopped up all of those kind of issues, and whether they can be captured as part of one budget process or in sort of one short piece of work, I think would be good to look at.
Okay. Is there anything you would have hoped that we would have discussed that we haven't already, that you'd like to talk about before we have a quick break and set up for speed dating? All okay? Are we okay? Rightio. So we'll take 10 minutes.